To continue with the second part of this panel on testimonies of Unpeace, our speakers will talk about former President Rodrigo Duterte's bloody war on drugs that has claimed at most 30,000 innocent lives. On March 11, 2025, Rodrigo Duterte was arrested on a warrant of arrest that was issued by the International Criminal Court and is currently held at the court's detention facility in The Hague. This is a great victory for the Philippine people seeking justice and accountability. Again, I just wanted to remind people that our questions and comments will be dealt with at the end of this session at a plenary time together. And so for our first speaker is Rubylin Litao, a commissioned deaconess of the United Methodist Church. Rubylin serves as the coordinator of Rise Up, which started as a network of church people and human rights advocates working with the families in the urban poor communities affected by the war on drugs. Today's Rise Up is a network of church people, human rights advocates, and the organization of victims' families and survivors of the failed war on drugs project of the former President Duterte. So welcome, Ruby, and thanks.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for this space and opportunity for giving us the time to share our ministry in the Philippines. Together with the ecumenical community, Kasimbayan, or Ecumenical Center for Development, and the promotion of church people's response, initiated Rise Up for Life and for Rights, started as a network, and then later an organization of victims' families. Since 2016, Rise Up has worked closely with the victims' families in their long quest for justice. Rise Up now is an active organization of survivors and families of victims and a network of human rights advocates, especially from the church sector. Former President Duterte waged a war on drugs as stated in its official state policy, Command Memorandum Circular Number 2016-16, called Project Double Barrel. This has caused one of the worst human rights crises in our country, killing thousands of the poor, majority of whom were breadwinners, leaving thousands of grieving mothers, widows, and orphaned children. Duterte's so-called war on drugs was in reality a war against the poor. It's a war against the poor. Poor people are being gunned down in broad daylight or deep in the night in police operations or vigilantes in civilian clothes, riding in motorcycles, riding in tandem style. This state policy left a trail of dead bodies for the period 2016 to 2022, estimated as 20,000 to 30,000 by human rights group. And according to the government official data, they were able to kill 6,252. Whatever the data, one killing is one too many. Over the past years, Rise Up stood in solidarity with the grieving families, especially the mothers who lost their loved ones. Their brutal killings left deep scars on the families with pain and trauma that will remain for generations. The domestic legal remedy is pathetic, if not proven to be unhelpful for the poor ones who seek justice for the violations and killings done on their loved ones. This was justified by, according to the Justice Secretary, Jesus Crispin Remulla, in a news last June 26, 2025, he said, "It's difficult to prove the case here in the Philippines and build up the case because those who need to speak are involved in the crime." Yet, the shared grief of the victims strengthen their collective call for justice and accountability, bringing them together in solidarity. Rise Up initiated actions to seek justice for the victims both domestically and internationally. So these are the pictures of some of the victims. The tireless efforts of the mothers, widows, sisters, and other family members provide deep inspiration to all of them and all those who accompany them in their quest. These are some of the photos wherein, since 2016, we were able to invite the families to join us in our mobilization and activities that will pursue, that will show their demand for justice. Like People's Sona, yeah. Since then, every year, the families are with us in these different kind of activities. And last year, we have the 2024, the People's Sona Duterte Ikulong Call. And then we have this annual Undas or All Souls Day. We are able to have these regular activities with them. It was last November. A call to action for churches, faith communities, and international communities. Since 2017, Rise Up has actively participated in lobbying efforts to embassies, parliaments, people's organizations, of course in partnership with ICHR, Migrante, and other international organizations. In August 2018, Rise Up submitted a communication complaint to the International Criminal Court with the assistance, of course, of the National Union of People's Lawyer, and provided information to the court's victims' participation and reparations section in 2021 and 2023. And this year, we are also preparing for submitting another views and concerns of the families in regard to the VPRS section. It was also in 2018 where member of Rise Up joined the International People's Tribunal held in Brussels. And in September to October 2019, Rise Up in partnership with ICHR launched the project Tao Po, Rising Up for Justice and Humanity, a series of dramatic presentations of the victims' plight in 6 European countries. In 2020, 2022, and 2023, 2 mothers of Rise Up joined the delegations that lobbied at the United Nations Human Rights Council. We are deeply grateful to the international community for accompanying Rise Up, especially the mothers in the above-mentioned international engagement. In the home front, from June to November, during the hearings held by the Philippine Congress, Rise Up families and advocates seized the opportunity to present their testimonies and experiences with the Philippine justice system. So these are some of the photos during the committee hearing. So these are the mothers, the fathers of the victims. The families felt a glimmer of hope when former President Duterte was arrested on March 11 and flown to The Hague on March 12, followed by his first appearance on March 14. While the victims' families, together with the advocates, are awaiting the upcoming September confirmation of charges, there are issues and situations confronting them. Online bullying or social media bashing were immediately experienced by the mothers and sisters of victims who publicly expressed their support to the arrest and detention of Duterte. We have requested the National Bureau of Investigation to look into this. So those are some of the photos also. At the same time, Duterte, through his counsel, has requested for his interim release on humanitarian grounds. As of now, the Office of the Prosecutor of the ICC has called on the judges not to grant the request. However, we still call and urge the international community to lobby the respective governments not to accept former President Duterte, and justice must prioritize the victims' families. Of course, we thank Australia. Palakpakan naman natin Australia. Yay! And Belgium, because they already expressed their non-acceptance of Duterte. So we continue to call on the international community to have its global action for justice and accountability, especially this coming September. Maraming salamat po. And before I end, may I invite everybody, let us all rise, and together let us read the simple aspiration of the victims' families. We want a society that cares for the poor, pursues social justice through employment, just wages, decent housing, social services, and not hearings. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you very much, Deaconess Rubylin. We commend the strength of the victims and their families in their resolve for justice in the face of attempts to silence them by the Duterte camp. I just wanted to say, from a personal note, I had the opportunity to meet with those families and visit to the and I was overly impressed and moved by the willingness to share stories and the determination of those families, and in the case mostly women at that point, to share their stories and to find out what happened to their family members. It was very moving, and thank you very much. We shall move on to explore the legal aspects of the case, what to expect for the next stage of the proceedings of our by Duterte, and what we can do as international community to support this case for the victims and their families. From attorney Kristina Conti, through a video message, Attorney Conti is a human rights lawyer from the National Unions of People's Lawyers and is an accredited assistant to counsel. For her work with the Rise Up, Attorney Conti has been red-tagged and intimidated, but like the victims and their families, Attorney Conti is unfazed by these harassments. And so let us watch with intent, with our open minds and open ears, to the words of Attorney Conti.
Magandang araw po. I am Kristina Conti of the National Union of People's Lawyers, Philippines. I am one of the counsels of Rise Up for Life and for Rights, a group supporting victims of the war on drugs of Rodrigo Duterte. I have been asked to provide some updates about the case against the former President Duterte pending before the International Criminal Court. Now, this case is only a part of the larger campaign for justice for the victims of Duterte, of his war on drugs, of his war on terror, of his war against dissent. Duterte is suspected of crimes against humanity in the act of murder committed in the territory of the Philippines, particularly Davao City, between November 1, 2011 and March 16, 2019. At the same time that this case is being heard, the investigation into the situation in the Philippines is ongoing. So the ICC prosecutor can continue to receive evidence about Duterte's other co-perpetrators. In the case of Duterte, the exchange of evidence or the disclosure period began in April this year and will end by July 1, 2025. After the prosecutor has synthesized, analyzed the evidence against Duterte, they are presenting the document containing the charges, or what we call the information or the charge sheet in the Philippines. They are presenting this on July 4, 2025. If the prosecutor meets these targets, then we are on track for the confirmation of charges hearing on September 23, 2025. Separately and independently, victims have been asked to register themselves as victims of the case. If they qualify within the parameters set by the ICC, they can participate in the trial and give their views and concerns. The target for registration or application of victims is until August 3rd, 2025. But of course, victims may come forward and present themselves before the court even until the very last stage of the proceedings, if they proceed. Now, for us, we have been temporarily represented by the Office of the Public Counsel for Victims until after the registration of the victims, their qualification, and eventual appointment of the victims of their counsel for choice. The OPCV has represented us throughout the interim period, throughout this time that Duterte has filed preliminary issues. There are two pending requests or motions by the Duterte camp at present: interim release and challenge to jurisdiction. Interim release asks for his temporary release to territory, to a receiving state where he will remain under strict conditions perhaps until the end of trial. This request should be seen within the context of 3 points. First, his detention has been made necessary because he has to stand trial, or he has to appear by September and any subsequent periods set by the court. His detention was made necessary so that he will not obstruct or endanger the proceedings or any of the parties to the case. And third, his detention has been made necessary to ensure that he will not commit further crimes or continue to commit the crimes accused of him. He is asking to be released upon conditions to a particular unnamed country at present. The prosecutor and, of course, the victims have opposed that, given that he has the tendency to flee from the charges, and has even decried or denied the legitimacy of the ICC. And this means that he would have the tendency to not show up in court and essentially defeat the purpose of this ICC trial in the first place. The challenge to jurisdiction asks for his permanent release from the court because it has no authority to hear the charges. Their claim is that the ICC only began the investigation in 2021, well after the Philippines had left the ICC or revoked its accession to the Rome Statute, which created the court. However, victims point out that the preliminary examination of the Office of the Prosecutor actually began in February 2018, a month, and that was the trigger, a month before Duterte wrote the ICC to withdraw from it. Thankfully, the effectivity of withdrawal comes only after 1 year, which is why the Philippines was still part of the ICC until March 2019. This is a question that is being awaited by the international community, but because it also has an impact on other countries and their own quests for justice and accountability. We are well on track to have the trial on September, and we hope to see you there. Thank you for supporting truth and accountability and just peace in the Philippines. And we especially thank you for defending the defenders. It is only with collective action that we dare to struggle and that we dare to win.
We express our thanks to Attorney for laying out the procedure clearly and carefully so that we know the next steps and can be a part of those next steps. Our final speaker for this panel at this moment is Mr. Peter Murphy, the chairperson of the International Coalition for Human Rights in the Philippines, the lead organizer of this conference. Peter will share with us how Solidarity has made this campaign for accountability and justice possible on a global scale. Welcome, Peter.
Thank you very much, Patricia. Good afternoon, everybody. Magandang araw. So this story for us begins in July 2016. We were having the second General Assembly of the ICHRP in Davao City at the Brockenshire Hotel. And Sarah Duterte was the mayor, and she sent one of her staff to give us a greeting at our assembly. Rodrigo Duterte was just sworn in a couple of weeks before that and was hugely popular, especially in Mindanao, especially in Davao. And he said that he was open to peace talks with the NDFP, but already news of the drug war killings was spreading. So at that time, ICHRP launched the Just Peace PH campaign, calling for the release of political prisoners and for the start of the peace talks. But in November to December 2017, after the Battle of Marawi, Duterte had cancelled the peace talks, issued Memorandum Order 32 and Executive Order 70, and martial law was extended in Mindanao, and ICHRP was refocused. So a surprisingly broad coalition of international organisations and individuals operated to call the Duterte government to account, and by implication was also challenging US policy in the Philippines. This coalition included the government of Iceland and many other governments who voted at the UN Human Rights Council for the High Commissioner Bachelet to prepare a report on the human rights situation in the Philippines. The staff of the OHCHR, the special rapporteurs, were very committed, and ICHRP was fully mobilised to support this effort. Our first action really was to get enough governments to either vote for the resolution for that report to be made or for them to abstain, that is, not vote against. And in that campaign there was success. So in September 2018, ICHRP sponsored an International People's Tribunal on crimes against the Filipino people held in Brussels, at which the families of the victims of Duterte's war on the poor and war on dissent and expert witnesses were giving sworn evidence. And this evidence and the verdict were then formally lodged with the ICC prosecutor at The Hague to support the cases already brought to the ICC by then by Rise Up and other families in the Philippines. So our partners were the International Association of Democratic Lawyers and the National Union of People's Lawyers, of which Christy is a prominent figure. These dedicated lawyers were also a key part of the practical reality of international solidarity with the Filipino calls for Duterte to be held to account. In June 2020, the High Commissioner gave her report about gross violations of human rights in the Philippines to the Human Rights Council, with a strong focus on the drug war killings, but its recommendations were not taken up by the Human Rights Council. At the end of that year, 2020, ICHRP had decided to sponsor Investigate PH, an initiative of international civil society to take up the investigation of the state of human rights in the Philippines, which was one of the main recommendations that the Human Rights Council had ignored. The full title of this initiative was the Independent International Commission of Investigation into Human Rights Violations in the Philippines, and it was launched globally at the end of January 2021. In March that year, we gave our first report. I still cannot believe the intensity of the work around that time, but we got that report in during the 46th ordinary session of the Human Rights Council. It contained a lot of data about the drug war killings, which we titled as Duterte's War on the Poor. The report was provided to the High Commissioner, to the UN Secretary General, to the ICC, and to many governments. Duterte responded by attacking the credibility of 3 of our commissioners of Investigate PH. But on June 15, so just a few weeks later, the prosecutor at the International Criminal Court formally applied for an investigation into the deadly war on drugs and other possible crimes since 2011. And in October that 2021, ICHRP held a global roundtable online in response to Bachelet's final oral report on the on the Philippines to the Human Rights Council. There, Bachelet had really steadfastly stuck to the analysis they had produced a year earlier and really continued to defy the pressure coming from US and Philippines. There were a few other bad governments out there as well, but they were probably the main ones. In November, ICHRP sent a letter to the ICC prosecutor calling on him, I think by that time, to cancel a temporary suspension of investigation into Duterte's government. So already this warfare was going on to stop the ICC doing its task, and we were pushing back hard the other way. And on December 9, so just a couple of weeks later, we also issued a statement condemning President Biden for inviting Rodrigo Duterte to attend his so-called Summit for Democracy, if you can vaguely remember that pretty sickening event. And just another week later, ICHRP convened the first interfaith roundtable on human rights in the Philippines, which has led to the Pagtatanim today. In the end of March 2022, ICHRP launched the Dirty Dozen campaign, demanding Magnitsky-style sanctions on Duterte and his key team, including those directly involved in the war on the poor. And in response, on April 2, Harry Roque red-tagged ICHRP itself in retaliation for being listed as one of the Dirty Dozen. In November 2022, so 7 or 8 months later, ICHRP joined the Philippine UPR Watch for the Geneva session on the Philippines, where we launched the compendium report of Investigate PH, maintaining a strong focus on Duterte's war on the poor. There are over 2 years after that when ICHRP kept urging the ICC to act. I'm sure you shared our great frustration that nothing much was happening, apparently. But finally they did on March 12, 2025, and we've just seen the account of what happened with Duterte's arrest, flown off to detention in The Hague, and the accusations against him, which Kristina has outlaid to you. I think we know he had to appear, like any accused criminal, before a court as soon as possible. That was March 14, and it gave us an incredible sense of satisfaction and achievement that scene we saw on the video, that was happening in front of our eyes. I think it was a not since Gloria Macapagal Arroyo was arrested for plunder in 2011 had anything like this happen. Arroyo had got away with it, actually. She's still out there. But the families and friends of Duterte's victims and their organisation, Rise Up for Rights and for Life, had waited for 8 long years for this moment of justice. Duterte's arrest was a first step in this direction after years of pressure from people's organisations who must get the credit for this really groundbreaking development. ICHRP called for the ICC to issue warrants for the arrest of other perpetrators of these crimes against humanity under Duterte. We suggested that Antonio Palade, Delfin Lorenzana, Eduardo Año, Harry Roque, Bato de la Rosa, that's how we call him, and Esperon should be caught up in this action. We get to see that happen. We also consistently and insistently call for the abolition of the anti-FLCAC and the repeal of the anti-terror law. ICHRP called for international people's solidarity and pressure to now escalate on the Marcos Jr. regime. Marcos Jr. continues these policies of Duterte and must be held accountable, especially following the verdict of the 2024 International People's Tribunal, which found him guilty of war crimes. So I'll wrap up now. We must note that the intense attacks on the families of the victims is ongoing. It's really important that as the international community we stand up and speak out against this attack and push back so that these people are protected in this next phase, which is going to be really high pressure. And you can see that ICHIRP, but actually many other forces, the ones that were active even before ICHIRP became involved, were key to this whole process coming to this moment. So let's keep it going. Thank you very, very much for your attention.
Thank you, Peter, very much. And he sort of quickly slid by how much work Investigate PH was and how quick we were able to pull that together, and the intensity for which it was pushed forward and completed and used effectively, as you can see. So thank you, Peter, and Rubylin, for your presentations, and also Attorney Conti, who obviously can't hear us, but we'll thank her as well. I think Peter summed it up very well. The push needs to continue, and we need to stay vigilant and on top of these cases, because accountability is really what's needed at this point.